Welcome, friends. Please silence your phones. Today's presentation is on hypnotism and mesmerism. Next on this topic is relative and absolute knowledge. At 12:30 p.m. on the first and third Sundays of the month, we have roundtable readings and discussions. This afternoon, we'll continue with our focus on the Bhagavad Gita and related notes. Our work of this lodge is aimed at passing on original teachings of the ancient message from the Masters of Wisdom that H.P. Blavatsky brought to us and named Theosophy. It is up to each individual to make this powerful and common sense message a living power in their every thought and action. Please help by your attendance, efforts, time, financial contributions to keep alive and thriving these uplifting teachings that are necessary for the future of humanity. This lodge is located in the Washington, D.C. area at 4865A Cordell Avenue, Bethesda, Maryland, 20814. The ULT declaration, printed on the back of our program, is our guide in working independently and with each other to achieve a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. We hold that the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching. We have neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers. The sole bond between associates is the furtherance of unity. All who are engaged in the true service of humanity are regarded as Theosophists without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization. And we welcome to our association all those who are in accord with the purposes of our declaration and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all. Today's reading is from the Voice of the Silence, which HPB dedicated to the few. Starting on page 53, we find these words. For, O disciple, before thou wert made fit to meet thy teacher face to face, thy master light to light, what wert thou told? Before thou canst approach the foremost gate, thou hast to learn to part thy body from thy mind, to dissipate the shadow, and to live in the eternal. For this thou hast to live and breathe in all, as all that thou perceivest breathes in thee, to feel thyself abiding in all things, as all things in self. Thou shalt not let thy senses make a playground of thy mind. Thou shalt not separate thy being from thy being and the rest, but merge the ocean in the drop within the ocean. So shalt thou be in full accord with all that lives, bear love to men as though they were thy brother pupils, disciples of one teacher, the sons of one sweet mother. Of teachers there are many. The master soul is one Alaya, the universal soul. Live in that master as its rays in thee. Live in thy fellows as they live in it. Before thou standest on the threshold of the path, before thou crossest the foremost gate, thou hast to merge the two into the one, and sacrifice the personal to the self-impersonal, and thus destroy the path between the two, which is the ontoscolano bridge. Thou hast to be prepared to answer Dharma, the stern law, whose voice will ask thee at thy initial step, hadst thou complied with all the rules, O thou of lofty hopes? Hast thou attuned thy heart and mind to the great mind and heart of all mankind? For as the sacred river's roaring voice, whereby all nature sounds are echoed back, so must the heart of him who in the stream went enter thrill in response to every sigh and thought of all that lives and breathes. And now we're having our today's talk on hypnotism and mesmerism.
Good morning and welcome, friends. These topics were great interest to the general public in the 19th century, in the 20th century, and the interest continues on today. There are certain articles that HPB and Mr. Judge wrote for the student body at that time, and they're as applicable to our social norm today as it was back then. This is a direct quote from this article on hypnotism. Mental powers, when ruled and directed by the kamic principle, are more powerful for evil than any other human capacity, for the reason that man as a mind being is a potential god, and if the powers of a god are turned to selfish purposes, the results are literally infernal. In the present cycle of race development, the fifth sub-race of the fifth root race, the peoples representing the mainstream of evolution are more prone to the misuse of mind powers than they have been or will be in any other cycle of this round. In the preceding sub-race, Kama was uppermost, with less monastic responsibility, while in the sixth sub-race, the evolutionary crisis will be over, with decisive choices having been made by nations and races en masse. In the sixth, Buddhi will gain ascendancy, but in this, the fifth sub-race, Kama manas is the dominant motivating principle. Kama manas, in its destructive aspect, joins intellectual invention with the pitiless egotism of desire, diabolism in short. Hence it is that the strongest and most immediate warnings left by the theosophical teachers refer to the selfish use of mental powers, and hence also the unparalleled dark use of the power of suggestion the world over at the present time. Now, we are the fifth sub-race of the fifth root race, so Kama manas is the dominant motivating principle in this cycle. And this philosophy was brought out to show us the dangers of going along with our kamic nature, because when it is misused, it brings about mischief to humanity. So the founders at that time of the theosophical movement knew far more than the scientific experiments then and now about the dread potencies of suggestion, hypnotism, and all of the other names that are given to these powers being related to forms of black magic. These series that this talk has been put together from were printed in Lucifer for December 1890, and because it contains so much scientific knowledge in it, scientific knowledge not from the perspective of materialistic science, but occultism. So it becomes extremely important for us to understand what we're being told, so that we can be knowledgeable in informing others. And HPV at that time said that the danger of hypnotism was minimized, and it still is minimized, but once we talk about it, we will see why it is harmful and also dangerous. Quote, hypnotism is the new scientific name for the old ignorance to superstition, variously called fascination and enchantment. It is an antiquated lie transformed into a modern truth. The fact is there, but the scientific explanation of it is still wanting. So let us put these this terminology on the board. You'll come across all these different terms, but they really are all together. So we have hypnotism and mesmerism up there, suggestion, fascination, enchantment, glamour, spell. And HPV gave us this verb saying that it really expresses what it does, to bewitch. So you will come across all these. They use the same power in different degrees, as we will explain. And to this day, there are different explanations for it. And Michael Nash provides 8 definitions of hypnosis by different authors, and his view is that it is a special case of psychological regression. Hilgard considers it dissociation. Social psychologist Sarbin and Co. describes it as role theory. Weisenhofer calls it a form of influence by one person exerted on another through the medium or agency of suggestion. Psychoanalyst Gillian Brenman calls it regression in the service of the ego. Spiegel and Spiegel imply that hypnosis is a biological capacity, and Erickson is considered the leading exponent of the position that hypnosis is a special, inner-directed, altered state of functioning. So here we go, all these statements about as to what it is, but none of them really tell us exactly what it is. Now, at HPV's time in the 19th century, it was considered, she said, by some as an irritation reacting upon the cells of the brain substance, causing by exhaustion a condition which is but another mode of sleep, hypnos, and by others simply a self-induced stupor produced chiefly by imagination. It differs from animal magnetism, where the hypnotic condition is produced by the braid method, which is purely mechanical, the fixing of the eyes on some bright spot, a metal or crystal. It becomes animal magnetism or mesmerism when it is achieved by mesmeric passes on the patient. So here it is. She is giving us a scientific definition for it. One is purely mechanical. Purely mechanical. Purely mechanical. In other words, the person is asked to stare at a metal, a bright spot, or a crystal, but in the animal magnetism or mesmerism, there is a passing over the body something, and she explains exactly what something is. So in the other one, mesmeric passes, and we'll talk about what that is. One is gazing, the other one mesmeric passes. So what is it? We are told that in that method no electropsychic or electrophysical currents are at work, but simply the mechanical molecular vibrations of the metal or crystal gazed at by the subject. So there is no electropsychic or electrophysical currents. So what is it that then brings it about? Well, it is the eye, and we're told that the most occult organ of all in our physical body is the eye. So it is this eye that serves as a medium between the metal or crystal and the brain, and attunes the molecular vibrations of the nervous centers of the brain into unison. And unison does not mean same. It means equality of the number of respective oscillations with the vibrations of the bright object held. So here is the mechanical aspect of that process. It is the eye, which is the most occult organ, that is adjusting the vibrations, not adjusting but synchronizing the vibrations of that metal or crystal that the subject is gazing at with the vibrations of the centers in the brain, bringing about unison. Unison. And that unison is not sameness. It simply means that the vibrations and the oscillation is exactly the same. So attunes the molecular vibrations of the nervous centers of the brain into the same oscillation that the bright object is exhibiting. And this unison, we are told, is what produces that hypnotic state. But in the second case, The right name, it would be animal magnetism, which is mesmerism, because the hypnotization by preliminary passes is brought about by the human will, whether conscious or otherwise, of the operator himself, that acts upon the nervous system of the patient. But here is the difference. We said this is molecular vibration, molecular. But in mesmerism, which is also referred to as animal magnetism, we should put it here. Animal magnetism. That's what it is referred to in a lot of writings. The vibrations then are not molecular, they're atomic, and that's the difference. This one, molecular, and that one is atomic, and this is the difference. So this unison in the animal magnetism or mesmerism is brought about by the energy called will in the ether of space, and so it brings about the super hypnotic state, which is called suggestion. For those which we call will vibrations and their aura are absolutely distinct from the vibrations produced by the simply mechanical molecular motion, the two acting on two separate degrees of the cosmo-terrestrial planes. So, can I take it off?
Yeah.
Okay, so it is on two different cosmo-terrestrial planes. So, they're on two different cosmoterrestrial planes. One is molecular, the other one is atomic. And in the Secret Doctrine, she explains where the atoms are. Does she not? She does, but we'll come to it. Well, maybe we should just put it here. The molecular is on the physical plane. It's the lowest one. This is lowest. The atoms are on the fourth plane. So you can see that they're not the same, are they? Okay, and then she says this is from the occult explanation. The psychologists even today, or psychiatrists, do not explain it this way, and we will explain why. So then she's telling us that during this process, enchantment, fascination, glamour, a spell, whatever it is that we're using, there's a transmission that occurs. And she says that to call it psychologizing or biologizing is totally meaningless because it does not give us a specific definition of what's going on. She says the force transmitted is the auric fluid. In distinguishing it from the auric light, which is the aura around each human being or every other animate or inanimate object in nature. So this is auric fluid. The transmission This is her own writing. And Reichenbach in Isis Unveiled called this force odd. O-D. It's the same thing, odd. So this transmission, this fluid, being a correlations of atoms on a higher plane and a descent to this lower one in the shape of impalpable and invisible plastic substances. Plastic substances. So, minimum, it's on the fourth plane. And she says the light that surrounds every animate and inanimate object in nature, on the other hand, is the astral reflection emanating from objects, its particular color and colors, the combinations and varieties of the latter, denoting the state of the gunas, or the qualities and characteristics of each special object or subject, the human aura being the strongest of all.
What does OD mean again?
Same thing as auric.
Oh.
Reichenbach uses this term. She quotes from him in Isis Unveiled, and it's called odd. Aura or odd meaning the same thing. So then she says, let us look at vampirism, because they're saying that these forces exist. Yes, we can dabble in these if we want to, because it's available to each human being. We all have it. But we need to know what exactly we're doing before we dabble in it. So she then talks about vampirism. And she says, we're going to take this word to mean involuntary transmission of a portion of one's vitality or life essence by a kind of occult osmosis from one person to another. So it is vitality vitality. Well, life essence also is the same thing. Life essence. That's being transferred by osmosis from one person to another. So, the person receiving it is endowed, or afflicted rather, with a vampirizing faculty, and acts to receive it. This is also the same essence of semi-substantial auric fluid, which we had spoken of before, that is being, by a kind of occult osmosis, being absorbed from one person to the next. So, what is this force? She calls it end and X osmosis by a beneficent or maleficent, in other words, conscious or unconscious effort to get this energy from someone else. Now, she says in a healthy operator that mesmerizes a patient, determined with the desire to relieve and cure him, the exhaustion that he feels at the end of that transfer is indicative of how successful he was in the transmission. That process of endosmose when it takes place, the healer has departed has departed some of his life essence to the patient, and that is why the exhaustion comes. When it is blind and a mechanical process, it means that neither the receiver nor the giver has any knowledge about it. It's just taking place. She says that conscious or unconscious black magic is what it is called. In the trained adept and sorcerer, the process is produced consciously and with the guidance of the will. In both cases, the agent of transmission is the magnetic and the attractive faculty, terrestrial and physiological in its results, yet generated and produced on the four-dimensional plane, which is the realm of atoms. So, some people then have the ability to receive it. They're not aware of it, but nevertheless they're sucking someone's vital energy into their own being, and the person feels depleted because somebody has taken it without their knowledge, and that depletion causes them that exhaustion, and it is how much vitality has been sucked out of the person that determines how exhausted they're going to be as a result of this vampirism. Then she discusses what black magic is, and perhaps we should mention it. She says, sufficient to say that whenever the motive which actuates the operator is selfish or detrimental to any living being or beings, all such acts are classed by us as black magic. The healthy vital fluid imparted by the physician who mesmerizes his patient can and does cure, but too much of it will kill. And here's the secret about it. Now, if we don't know what we're doing and we give too much vital energy to the ill person, we will kill them, is what she's saying. You have to know what it is you're doing if you are practicing it to be beneficent to the other person. So, the first process, we said it was simply mechanical, but the second process is not mechanical. It requires mesmeric passes. So, and we also mentioned the lowest plane for the mechanical process, which is molecular, and the other one, which is on the fourth plane, which requires a well-defined will. Now, what exactly is will? This is a force, obviously, we all have. In the Secret Doctrine, I think it is on page 290, 291, Icha Sakti, she talks about it. It is given. It is a quotation, I believe, from Subaro's explanations of it. And on the lowest physical plane, it is called motion. Because when we use that power, we're moving our arms, legs, and so forth, so it is designated on motion. But when we are dealing with it on the upper planes, what exactly are we talking about here? Metaphysical planes? Metaphysical planes, then it becomes will. Now, she says that most of us don't know how to use this power on higher planes. But in order to be able to be successful as a mesmerizer, we need to understand what it is and learn how to use it. And this is the key to all of the mesmeric operations on the higher planes. there's a section where we're dealing with the explanation of metallotherapy, because at that time this had come into being and it was used for quite a long time. But why it was given up is that all metals did not treat all nervous diseases, nor all of the patients were responsive to the same metals. So our wise scientists decided that since it didn't work for everybody, then there was no value in it. And the explanation says there's an analogy that exists between the activity of the system and electricity. And the fundamental fact which is exhibited has this peculiarity attached to it, that by no means every metal acted on every nervous disease, we just said, and that the patients affected by certain metals were few and exceptional. And so this showed that electric fluids operating and curing diseases existed only in the imagination of the theorists. And of course, it's false. And she refers to Charcot and Burke. She says, Charcot, having vindicated Dr. Burke, the once discredited discoverer of metallotherapeutic, Schill and others discredited all those who believed in electric fluids. And this seems enough to be given up in favor of molecular motion, which reigns supreme in physiology, and of course she says for the time being. So molecular motion then was adopted in expressing electrical fluids being, or electrical current being transferred into another, in bringing about change in the patient for cure. And she says, occultism is audacious enough to maintain that electric or magnetic fluids, which they're identical, are due to their essence and origin to that same molecular motion, now transformed into atomic energy, to which every other phenomenon in nature is also due. So, when she says the galvano or electrometer fails to oscillate, showing that there is electric current going on, so it doesn't mean that it's not there. She says that simply it has passed onto another and higher plane of action, and so since there is no connection between it and the electrometer, the energy displayed on a plane which is entirely disconnected from the galvanometer or electrometer does not show any movement, because it simply has moved on to a higher level of expression of itself. So, the first transmitted from one man or object to another man or object, whether in hypnotism, electricity, metallotherapeutic, fascination, is the same in essence, only varying in degree and modified according to the subplane of matter it is acting on, or which subplanes occultists know there are 7. So then we have to apply this philosophy or theory, however way we want to look at it, onto 7 different planes. On each plane, the force transmitted is the same, but its magnitude is different. On the physical plane, the lowest, it is molecular. But as we go onto the higher planes, it becomes atomic. And in the Secret Doctrine, there's a section where the atomic vibrations are explained, and their force increases tremendously. just reinstate this, that unison does not mean the same. It means that the respective number of their vibrations have been equilibrated. The brain through the eye equilibrates the number of vibrations of the object to itself, thereby bringing that unison, and so hypnotic state then takes place. So, in order for this process to work, HPB is telling us that two conditions are requisite. As every organic or inorganic body in nature is distinguished by its fixed molecular oscillations, it is necessary to find out which are those bodies which will act in unison with one another on the human nervous system, and that remembering molecular oscillations can influence the nervous action of the rudder when the rhythms of their vibrations coincide. Number of oscillations are identical in order to bring the hypnotic condition about. Well, I have run out of time. I'm not sure. But I want to say one thing about mesmerism, because we did explain it and compared it as we went along. Perhaps another time we will do the mesmeric aspect first. Mr. Judge tells us that the higher self is not involved in any of these processes. The higher self does not belong to any one of these planes of existence. Where is our higher self? We talked about it in the previous talk. We said the self is. Let's put it up here. The self simply is. It lives in the ever-present now. It's not concerned about the past or future. Now. It lives in the present now. We said its nature is Sat, Chit, Ananda. Sat is being, Chit is consciousness, Ananda means bliss. It is not involved in any of these occurrences or modifications of the physical or astral or anything else. Now, HPB tells us that in order to understand mesmerism, we need to understand what exactly occurs. And as I said, I've run out of time, but we'll mention it. In this process then, what is occurring to the physical body for that hypnotic state to come about? He says that this fluid changes the polarity of the physical body and it makes it dormant. It changes the polarity and it makes it dormant. So what is it that is being exhibited is the inner man. What is the inner man? In the philosophical articles, we refer to it as the astral, because the inner man, that electromagnetic entity, is the connection between the mind and the physical body. Without it, none of this could take. So all of the faculties that come into activity normally has to go through the physical body. But when it is asleep, it is not any hindrance to the inner man. So all of its faculties then can come through, and that is why in mesmeric condition, the person sounds intelligent. Sometimes it exhibits different language capabilities and so forth. Why? Because all those are stored, and so it comes right through. As I said, we will talk about it a little bit more, perhaps another time. But the astral has to be taken into consideration in order to understand this, what we talked about today. Now we will open it for questions.
So there's a distinction between hypnotism, mesmerism, and animal magnetism, or are they describing this one phenomenon?
Well, animal magnetism and mesmerism is the same. Some articles refer to it as one, some as the other, but it means the same thing. It is the same. The essence is the same. The force is the same, but it acts on a different plane. We said that when you're concentrating on a piece of crystal or metal, that takes place on the physical plane. It's molecular. The oscillation is simply molecular motion. But when it becomes mesmerism, it's on the fourth plane, at least on the fourth plane, which is atomic. It's different. Its significance is different because the force is much more powerful. She says that it's the same process in all of these. We put it up, and then I think I took it out. What did she call it? She called them all different names: hypnotism, suggestion, fascination, enchantment, glamour, spell, and she gave a verb to bewitch. She says that is the one that really explains the phenomena the best, to bewitch, because the physical body is dormant because its polarity has changed, according to the mesmeric article Mr. Judge wrote, and so the inner man expresses itself, whereas normally the physical and the inner work together. So all of the sheaths of the body are synchronized. When you make a response, it comes from all of it. But in this condition, it doesn't, does it? Because that is why it is black magic, because the freedom of the person is not there, because the mesmerizer is a stronger party here. So it's not just influencing it, but it can control it, and it's very dangerous. So she tells us that under no circumstances should we take someone's free will away from them, unless that the person who is the mesmerizer is healthy and his only interest is to heal the other. Even then, she says discrimination has to come into it, because if you give too much of the fluid, you're going to kill the person. You need to know what exactly you're transferring and how much to transfer. And who knows what we're talking about. This is fluid on the fourth or fifth plane. How do you control it? Through will. And that is very dodgy. Yeah.
So I think that it's very difficult for science to try to measure any of this stuff. So they basically go with what they can measure, if you will. My only exposure to any of this was one lesson in my psychology course I took in college on hypnotism. Now, mesmerism was never mentioned that I recall.
Because it's older. She says that sometimes old-fashioned superstitions are given a new name by scientific world because they want to use it, and so they bring it out under a different heading, which is what hypnotism is all about. Because Anton Mesmer brought it out in the, was it 17th century? I believe so, or 18th century perhaps. And he gave it popularization because he was a healer. He healed patients at that time. And I believe Mr. Judge mentions it in his article by saying that Mesmer was the agent for the 1775 cycle, and that is all that could have been done at that time. But Mesmer never mentioned all those behind him. He belonged to brotherhoods and so forth, but he never mentioned them. Perhaps he was not allowed to at that time. So what exactly is your question?
I was just trying to understand.
Okay, scientific world, do they know the constitutional men, first of all? We talked about 7 planes of existence just now, did we not? So there are 7 planes, 7 levels of consciousness, right? What else? conscious. 7 planes of substance. And from what we just said, they all vibrate at a different rate because the sheath of the human body corresponds to those planes. So we're a miniature copy of the cosmos, so all those are in us. So, and the other thing is, HPB constantly says, in order to understand true psychology, the West must learn this from the East, because the East have had thousands of years of experience with psychology based on the true system, because they understand the 7 planes. They have 6 darshanas, the 7th being the combined synthetic aspect of the 6, and they do not compete with one another. They correlate the stuff together because they understand that just like any one religion cannot give all of the truth, neither does those darshanas give the whole truth. So if you correspond them, you're going to get a more complete view of truth than otherwise. So, and the other one is this fluid that we just talked about. Do they accept an astral body? I don't think the even the most perceptive scientists today, that one person only, who was it? Erickson was the only one who defined hypnotism as an inner directed altered state of functioning. So the perceptive ones know that there is something there, but no one has come out and accepted HPB's statements about the astral body or the aura around the human body and all of the other bodies. These are real. They're not just words. It exists because people who have the inner eye can see this aura around each human being, animals, and so forth. And the fluid is this electrical current that is being transferred, because the astral body is electromagnetic. The aura obviously is also. So it's the magnetic fluid, but it's not on the physical plane. That is hypnotism only on that physical plane, because its motion is molecular. But we're talking about the atomic 4th plane when we talk about mesmerism. So she says that this fluid then comes down from the 4th plane and affects the human being on the physical plane, but it is impalpable, it is invisible substances, plastic substances she calls them. So until science acknowledges these facts as facts, I don't think they'll get at the truth, because they only do their experimentation on the physical plane. They never go higher than that. So I'm not sure how we're going to move forward, but science has come a tremendous way since 19th century. So when they exhibit sincerity and honesty in these experiments, I think help comes from higher realms as well. HPB always says that the masters are ready to help all those who want to eliminate the suffering of humanity. So the scientists who are sincere in that effort, I think, get help. So eventually we'll get there, but what century, I'm not sure at. This is not an easy transition from the scientific viewpoint to this viewpoint. There, as I said, these have to be accepted as real in order for the experimentation to continue. Because, yeah.
Why dabble in black magic if
Why dabble in black magic? Well, she says that sometimes it's unconscious, like two people are in the same room and one has the ability to vampirize the other, in other words, sucks their vital energy out of them without knowing it. It's just a tendency that they have developed, and neither the person who's being vampirized or the person who does the vampirizing know anything about it. So that's unconscious black magic, because the vital energy of the other person is being sucked by osmosis. Endo and exosmosis is what she calls it, and it's being sucked out of it. And the person feels diminished in energy because their vital energy is being sucked by the other person. But she says also that the masters, and what's the opposite side of that? The white magician, there's the black magicians on the other side. This student does not know why they exist, but perhaps is the same concept duality. When one is there, so is the other. The white lodge is for the benefit of humanity, wants to move humanity towards self-dependency, self-enlightenment, and finally emancipation. But the other side wants to hold humanity as slaves to what they want to come about. In other words, destruction of humanity. Don't ask me, because I don't know what kind of psychology that is and why they would do it, but nevertheless, she says that when sorcerers consciously do it, it's black magic, because they're not for the benefit of the individual they're sucking this energy out of, but to their detriment. She does have it. Because she says, if it is done by the honest and healthy person with integrity, who's only for the benefit of the other, she says, it is always right to try and alleviate suffering whenever we can, and to do our very best for it. And then somewhere in the bottom she says, if the illness is a result of karmic debt, she says that it will be alleviated, but it comes back as a different kind of evil to that person, because you're responsible for the causation of that disharmony that was brought into the universe, however that was. So you will be cured of the disease if the hypnotizer knows what they're doing, but she says it will come back to you as a different evil thing. Now there was something else here. She says, this suggestion, if it is by thought, it is an act of black magic, still more pregnant with evil consequences than a spoken one. So mentally, the sorcerers can do it by simply mental projection. She says that that is even worse than a spoken word. And she says at the bottom, we can even use this facilitation to cure people out of their bad habits, such as drinking and lying. And she says, although she says the dropping of his vicious habits will not add nothing to his good karma, which it would had his efforts to reform been personal, of his own free will, and necessitating a great mental and physical struggle, still, she says, a successful suggestion prevents him from generating more bad karma and adding constantly to the previous record of his transgressions. So she's recommending that if we can help the other person, to go ahead and do it. But the black magicians, their intention is harm. It is not anything good for anybody. And I think she had something to say about it. Yeah, she says that even if the person, this operator, is selfish, or their act is detrimental to any living being or beings, then it gets classed as a black magic. And the sorcerers do it intentionally, knowingly, what they're doing. They're harming people or whatever else they harm. This student tries not to go to those places very much, but it doesn't.
Just a quick summary. Just down the motive again of the two parties involved, any of this stuff. And, you know, you have to trust the person who is taking charge of you, if you will, through this process. And while they're taking, you know, while they're in charge, if they're black magicians, they can influence you greatly one way, or if they're being really helpful to you as white magicians, they could help you a lot in terms of overcoming some of your improper tendencies.
Well, I really don't think that ordinary people are black magicians by intent. I think they do it unknowingly. If they don't know how to do it right and they think they're helping you, they're doing it wrongly, but it is not their intent to harm you. They harm you nevertheless, but I don't think it is intentional. Most people are out there trying to help others. But here's the key in this stuff also, that when people start charging money for it, it becomes quite, what's the word? I don't even have a word for it. But there was a student at one time who told me, she said to me, every day I asked this lodge for advice as to how I should deal with my dilemma. She said, we all have to eat, we all have to pay rent, we all have expenses. And she said the answer that came to her was, take more patience. Don't suck the few out of all of their income. In other words, make your fee reasonable, not unreasonable. So there again, motive and intent comes into. Anyway, thank you. And next week's talk is on relative and absolute knowledge.
Right.
Please join us then.
And we'll start on our afternoon session in a few minutes.